let's get going. These power hours, I think are a ton of fun. Um, you know, I think one of the reasons why I get excited about them is everybody on this call is a subject matter expert in something, or they have something that they could share. And I'm not saying everybody needs to do these. It's just great when somebody raises their hand and says, that they'd like to. So Dan and I have been buds for a while now, and have massive respect for him. And he was kind enough to invite me to a Culture City event in January to celebrate Dominique Wilkins' birthday. So I got to see kind of up close and personal the work that Culture City does, the work that Dan's involved with, the work that Neek does as chairman of Culture City. But it's just amazing. And I think, these topics around, I guess, things that we don't necessarily think about every day. I mean, some of us do, some of us don't. Um, I love it when we get to have those discussions, whether we're talking to Shannon Elizabeth and Simon about conservation issues in South Africa. We're going to be talking to Brooke Bebo and her husband Rickus, and we're going to be talking about mining, which is certainly not something that I think about on a regular basis. Hello, Cynthia. Good to see you. Um, Great to have you with us. So I'm excited to hear from Dan, who raised his hand and said, "Yeah, I'd love to talk about the things that he thinks about as a dad, but also the things he thinks about professionally with the work that he does with Culture City." So with that, turning it over to Dan the man.
Well, thanks to you guys for joining. Appreciate Sal, Cynthia, Chris, Tim, Steve, Scott, of course, Kathy and Scott putting this on for joining. Kathy, quick housekeeping item. Did my email make it to you with the link? Okay, no problem. I can share my screen where it's necessary. I'd like to just give a couple visuals. And if we have time, I've got a couple videos that I think will be impactful for us to watch together. They're not that long. But happy April Fool's Day. Has anybody gotten pranked yet this morning? Anybody got any good pranks?
Big time.
You got one, Scott?
Yeah, the guy Simon that I talked to, so he's got a book called Energize that came out that I did very, very well. And he's a pretty prominent speaker. So he put on, I don't know if it was on LinkedIn or Instagram, that Disney had picked it up and they were doing a documentary. And anyway, so I'm like, "Hey, dude, man, congratulations on the documentary." And I go on and on and on. And he's like, "Yeah, no, that was an April Fool's joke." So,
Anybody else? Any April Fools happen this morning? No. You got one, Scott?
Yeah, and I shouldn't even have bitten off on it, but a couple friends had sent me a news story that Robert Kraft was selling the Patriots for around $7 billion. That it just made sense in time, and I'd lost track of the date. And I actually looked for the story, and I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I'm an idiot," But he's not selling.
Are you in Boston or New England? Where are you?
I'm actually in St. Louis, but my wife's from New England. So
okay, cool. So that's where it's where Scott and Kathy are. That's where I grew up in Connecticut. I live in Georgia now, but I lived in Boston for a little bit. I had the pleasure working with their Patriots radio network at one point way back in the day.
Okay. Yeah, when I met, she was living in Dorchester. So
there we go. Good pronunciation there with Dorchester. So you guys ever feel lonely? Ever feel like your voice is not heard? Raise your hand or use the chat button if you want, just to relate to any of these things I'm going to say. If you felt lonely, respond. If you've ever felt left out, I think they call that what, FOMO, fear of missing out. You wanted to be somewhere, but you couldn't. Maybe a situation where your voice was never heard. Well, these are probably all things that, as I was asking you these questions, you probably went back to COVID. And we all kind of sort of dealt with it during COVID, didn't we? Felt sort of isolated, left out, weren't participating in things, more so in public because we were told not to. But thank you for the comments. Well, that's what today's about. Today's about talking about acceptance and inclusion for a community that gets a little overlooked, and for good reason. I don't want to say good reason, but for obvious reasons. And we'll get into that throughout today. But things we're doing about acceptance and inclusion, and what we'll talk about today, all has to do with the nonprofit culture city and how we're changing the narrative for what's happening in communities, really kind of shifting things for the sensory needs community. So the other things we'll cover today is obviously talk about our nonprofit, what we do, our partners, talk about some success stories, and share some stats with you from the CDC real quick. I'm not going to overload you with stats, but these are very important things for us to know just in our own community about what's happening and the impact that's going in our neighborhoods and as we go out into public. So we'll cover some of that as well. Hopefully I'll make it a little interactive as we go, but certainly if something comes up and you want to stop this at any point, please do. And I'll start off with, and I want you guys to hold me accountable. If I miss anything that I just kind of set up for today, let me know. But in the meantime, I'm going to pull up, if I can, just going to pull up a quick, I'm going to share my screen and pull something up real quick. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. I think the first thing for us to talk about today is really what are sensory needs? And we talk about this community sensory needs. What does that actually mean? This is where I need a Kathy in my life, right?
Everyone needs a Kathy. Nobody more than me. All right. So we'll just go to this. What are sensory needs? Really, it's the processing of the nervous system. It's really recognizing as things are coming at you from the external world, how are we organizing that, processing it so we can manage it and have it come through our body. And when we talk about sensory needs, the 5 obvious ones we all know about are sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, but there's 3 others. There's really a total of 8. And interoception is really about your organs, and it might be something like even your stomach. You might not recognize that you're hungry. We talk about vestibular. I got to do all these pronunciations. Has a little more to do with your body and your positioning and what your perception is. And then the last one is proprioception, has to do with, and this is something my son struggles with, location and movement. So these are really the 8 senses for individuals. And what happens is it's, let me pull all the beautiful faces back up. It's really hard for, the common thread here that we're talking about. It's hard for these individuals to be in public places. They get overwhelmed and they choose not to go. And that's, underlining the key theme here today about acceptance and inclusion. That's not acceptance. It's not inclusion. So they decide to stay home, and we all dealt with that, during COVID, and nor do we want to maybe repeat that again, but it's a very similar thing that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's just simple things like we get to do every day that I don't want to say take for granted, but we don't think about, right? We go to the grocery store, we go to a restaurant, we enjoy time with a family. We get to go to sporting events and things and live entertainment and things like that. So
one of the things I also wanted to cover, I'll just pull it up again real quick. I probably should have kept it up, and I won't keep going to this, but I do want to share some stats with you real quick. And before I go there, maybe in the chat box, you guys can raise your hand. I'm going to kind of mention some groups here that are most commonly associated with sensory needs. And if you recognize with any of the groups, maybe a neighbor, coworker, family member, just raise your hand.
Dan, tell us when and why you got involved with Culture City.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of it has to do with my son. And so when Jack was growing up, there were a couple of public experiences that we had together that I didn't really kind of understand what was happening with him. I'll give you a real story. Was in 2013, and at the time I worked in media. So I worked in media, did some play-by-play for Georgia Tech. And Jack had been to several Tech games, and he was probably 8 at the time, 8 or 9. He'd gone to several Georgia Tech football games. And this one game, this is when the rivalry was a little hot, was Georgia was playing UGA, playing the Bulldogs. And we went to the game, and I was super excited for him because, again, he was a big fan. And I got seats through a friend behind the bench. I think we were about 13, 15 rows up behind the bench. So he was going to be able to see kind of like everything happening in front of him, all the players, the action on the field. And I was really happy for him. So as we were walking into the stadium, I was picking up some clues with Jack that seemed a little off. And then when we got to our seats, it really took off. And we didn't see kickoff. He had a meltdown right in the stands, and we had to go back up the stairs through the concourse. And at that time, I was with Jack, pulled off to the side in the concourse away from the crowds. He couldn't decompress, and I had to make the difficult decision to leave and drive home. And he screamed and cried the whole way home. And I didn't know what was going on at the time. But later, Jack would get diagnosed for a rare chromosome abnormality. And a lot of that has to do with sensory needs, which is one of the probably 20-ish groups that fall into this category in this community of sensory needs. And flash ahead, so that was in 2013, I went and worked for the Atlanta Hawks. And in 2017, you can see it right there above my finger. That's a certificate that I got when I was at the Atlanta Hawks. And Culture City partnered with State Farm Arena, which is where the Hawks play here in Atlanta. And I went through the training. And it's one of the 3 things we do with public venues and our partners is we train the staff. They get certified sensory inclusive. A percentage of the staff needs to go through the training and get certified. And once that happens, then the script flips and we start putting in resources and tools into the venue. And one of the things that we do, one of the resources is this bag that you'll see. It's a sensory needs bag that you can check out at guest services. And inside the bag is, fidget toys, different things like this to kind of calm their nerves that they can use. We got noise reduction earphones. The great thing about these earphones is they fit all head sizes, and you can still hold a conversation with the person next to you that you're going to an event with. It really takes care of the outer noise, whether that's loud music or fireworks going off. So it really kind of lessens that, but keeps the opportunity of a conversation to still happen. Again, more fidget toys for them. The other thing we're doing now are glasses that they can wear that, block out strobe lighting and overstimulating lights that might be happening at the venue. The other cool piece that I really love, and this was influenced by our co-founder, Dr. Julian and Dr. Michelle Kahn. They have a son who's nonverbal autistic, is these communication cards. So on one side, it's how I'm feeling, and on the other side, it's what I need. And they can point to it. And that's a little part of the training that goes on that we do with our venue partners. So at the time when I went through the training in 2017, we had about 50 partners. Right now, we have over 2,100 in 6 countries. So we've really scaled. I think a big part of our opportunity of scaling has to do with, COVID. I think we all related to what these individuals, what this community goes through, what isolation really means, how difficult it is for them to be in public places. Again, it's anything from a restaurant to a concert. We're on tour right now with Coldplay. So it's anything in between that they want to go out and experience that we get to do every day. And it's just difficult for them to do it at that time. So I'll stop
Yeah.
right there. Go ahead.
What a question.
Yeah.
So when you partner with Cole, like you said, you're on tour with Coldplay. Does Coldplay say we want our concerts to be more inclusive? Did they bring you in, or how does that partnership happen?
Yeah. Great question, Scott. And the beauty of what we've done at Culture City is there isn't really boots on the ground like me. That's out kind of promoting what we do and the services we do. And we'll get to the future of where we're going. This all happened because Chris Martin, the lead singer of Coldplay, reached out to Culture City and said, look, I want everyone, all our fans to enjoy our show. We know there's fans out there that struggle to go to a public event. And some of those disabilities are visual. They might be blind. They might be hearing impaired. Those things are a little more visible with the naked eye. We can see their disability. And an interesting stat from the CDC is 84% of a disability is invisible. And what Chris Martin had done, which is super cool, is he hired an agency that was going to handle all the visible disabilities, the blind, deaf, what have you. They've got different tools, resources in place. Interesting things like having these fans arrive early before the show. They've got a staff that'll escort them around the venue and show them where everything is, right to their seats. And then we're at every show just outside the venue with a sensory room. We have 4 versions of a sensory room right now. One's a physical space that we architect. We have one of those at State Farm Arena. But the other 3 are pods that we use in concourses for like a mall or maybe even an arena. We just launched that at T-Mobile Arena in Vegas. It's like a shell. It's like a 12 by 12 space. You just kind of open it up and you go in and close it. What we're doing at the Coldplay concerts is like a blow up blimp. It's like a 12 by 12 space. You plug it in. I've done 3 events with this thing. It's easy. It blows up in 9 minutes. You deck out the inside of it into a sensory room, make it really calming and inviting. And then we've got these bags on site. As a matter of fact, I got a statistic the other day about these bags. So we're at every show. We're right outside the venue with Coldplay. They're on a world tour right now. We've been doing this for 2 years. The other thing these fans get is a lanyard. So it states that they're VIP. And that just alarms the staff. If they need to leave the venue that they're going to the sensory room, they can re-enter, which is super important. As we know, we go to concerts, you walk out the door, you ain't coming back in. So that works really well. That's part of the training we do. They got that lanyard. They can exit the venue, go decompress, go into the sensory room. They can take a bag with them. They can chill there and listen to the music while they're in the sensory room. And they have that flexibility now, which is fantastic. So the stat that I got the other day, listening to a talk, one of our other partners is, I don't know, do we have any wrestling fans on the call today?
But real wrestling or fake wrestling?
No, sure. I mean, they get hurt a little bit.
All right, fake
There's
wrestling.
a new league started by Tony Khan called AEW. And he started it in 2019 and immediately partnered with Culture City. So he was the first professional wrestling league to provide accessibility and inclusion for the neurodivergent community, which is what we're talking about today, which is the sensory needs community. Just super cool. But I got a stat from him and from the Coldplay concert that we've given out 100,000 Culture City sensory bags, which is huge. You talk about a 2-year tour and you talk about us being partnered with Tony Khan since 2019. I can't believe it's only been 5 or 6 years with this guy and what he's done already. And they just set a record with a wrestling event that they did in London at Wembley Stadium. I don't know if y'all saw this, but they sold almost 81,000 tickets to this event at Wembley Stadium, AEW event. And we were there. We had our sensory room set up, and it was a really cool experience. I was just had a quick thought while we're on the call here. Is anybody from Boston on this call? All right, there she is. Lindsay, hey, how are you?
I'm good, Dan. I'm good.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment. I think this was before certainly Culture City was around, but I just wanted to say, like, I took my kids to their first concert when they were 8, and it was Bruno Mars. And we had like 12th row tickets. It was really, really great. But twins tend to have more sensory stuff than other kids. And mine are not diagnosed with anything, but they definitely were sensitive to really loud noises and shocking things. My daughter had a thing against fireworks for a bit, but so the concert starts, and the first beat of the Bruno Mars stuff is pyro, explosions, and like boom bass, like they could feel it in their bones. And both kids look at me with this terrified look, like, we're not going to make it. So my husband took my son outside into the hallway, and someone saw him immediately. He was like, come with me. And I was like, I would have been like, no, but he went, and he gave him earmuffs, and he was able to come back and enjoy the show. And then we did the same thing for my daughter. And I just loved that they reacted so fast. And I think it's so cool that what you're doing is normalizing this, because I don't know how many venues know how to do this. But I think it's so important, and it's so, so great. So keep on doing it, man. It wasn't a question. I was just cheering you on.
Thank you for that feedback. It's a really great real life story that you experienced. I'm glad it had a good ending. Most of these don't have a good ending. And back to why, how we've grown has been organically. We don't have boots on the ground. Unfortunately, some things happen in communities, and there's a need for what we do and the services we provide. And there's great organizations out there that are championing what inclusion is. I think the difference of what we do is we really roll up our sleeves and make inclusion a reality by providing resources, providing tools. The third piece that we do, thank you for sharing that, Lindsay. And the reason I asked about anybody from Boston on this call is the next piece of what we do with our venue partners is a sensory room. We help orchestrate, architect the inside of that room. Doesn't need to be a big space. When I was with the Atlanta Hawks and we did our sensory room, we took an area that wasn't even functioning and made it functional. It was under a stairwell. The beauty of the stairwell where we put the sensory room is right next to guest services, right next to the breastfeeding room. So those three kind of work really well together within a very big venue. And back to Boston, I'm from New England. I'm a huge Boston sports fan. And it was great to finally see the partnership happen at TD Bank North Garden, where the Bruins and the Celtics play. They put in 4 sensory rooms. 4. Just fantastic. You would think more football stadiums would need to do that. Some of them only have 1. They definitely need multiple. But for an arena like that to put in 4 tells you they're taking it seriously. And it really speaks a little bit to the future of where we're going with communities and what's happening with communities.
That was that was where we saw the show, by the way.
Yeah, great.
So that was 7 years ago. So
wow.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Wow, awesome. Yeah, they've come a long way. So they've since been trained. I think there's a lot where we go, where all of us go, wherever we live. I think there's enough knowledge now where it's aware. People are more aware than we've ever been before. And the next step is now that acceptance, which I think is happening in a lot of communities. And that third step that we're taking, which is truly inclusion, to really infuse communities with resources and tools, is really what's making the big change. So it's been pretty extraordinary. And there's, I've started to go through some of the groups that represent sensory needs. And if you all want to participate by raising your hand or putting in the chat box, any of these groups that you recognize that I might mention here really are the common thread of what all these groups deal with in sensory needs. So the most common is autism. cerebral palsy, Huntington's disease, post-traumatic stress disorder, mental health. You know, there's I don't know if I mentioned Huntington's disease. That's another one that I was just learning about the other day through an experience that we had with someone at a show, actually at an AEW event. The child was a fan, and they created an inclusive environment for this person to actually come to a live event. And a lot of the wrestlers got very close to this fan. I think his name's Charlie. It became kind of a national story. Unfortunately, we lost Charlie, which was expected. The life expectancy was short. He lived a little bit longer, but it was an interesting story to hear from Tony about what they did at a show with Charlie and how the wrestlers stayed in touch with him and really became part of their community. So it's very touching. So there's probably like 25, 26 different groups that represent sensory needs. Dementia is another one. Brain injury is another one, which is something that I struggled with many years ago. I was actually hit by a car at the age of 8 and wasn't supposed to live, and had a major brain injury, and just, blessed to be not only on this call, but gotten, almost 50 more years of my life. So, Culture City did not exist when I took Jack to that Georgia Tech football game. And if they did at the time, when we came up the stairs into the concourse, we would have had those resources. We would have had a sensory bag, which we could have grabbed, like what Lindsay was saying with the earphones. We could have had the fidget toys. If it got real overwhelming, then we'd have a sensory room that we could go to really kind of decompress the situation. So that's a little bit about what we do. When we partner with venues, the 3 things that we do: we train, provide resources and tools, and in some cases have a sensory room. Not all the venues have a sensory room, but the training and the bags are the most important piece. A couple partners out here that are just using the bags and the training are the College Football Hall of Fame here in Georgia. Fox Theater is another one. I don't think they have a sensory room. But we've got, like I said, 2,100 partners throughout 6 countries. So, the other thing I can tell you about Culture City is a little more where we're going in the future of what we're doing. Has a lot to do with technology.
I think Scott Heathman's got a question.
Oh, okay, cool. Good, perfect, glad.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think there's such an interesting myth, and our son was diagnosed at age 8 on the spectrum, and my wife picked up on his sensory deprivations early on because she was a deaf educator up in Vermont, and a lot of deaf children have these in combinations with being deaf, also have other sensory issues too. So she picked it up early. And so that's when we got him screened, and we found out all kinds of things about him. But over the years, we have taken advantage of different opportunities to have, like the AMC Theater would have a sensory friendly showing of a movie on a Saturday morning. So we would drive to that theater and the lights would be on, the volumes turned down. And, you could walk around and, it's like your living room. It's great. But funny enough, the first event he went to was at Fenway. It was in the month of April for Autism Month. They ran an autism special for tickets, and he was about 9 years old. And so we went to guest services because we noticed he was kind of getting all out of sorts after about 2 innings. And their sensory room was right behind guest services, kind of near right field, if you will. And they put us in the room. They brought us food that we didn't need to pay for. I mean, they brought us bags. They had toys out for him to kind of fidget with. And we were really impressed that even in 2012 timeframe, like this existed at this old stadium. Like they found a way to do it. And I think that, again, the misnomer that you will grow out of this. Well, we just got back from Disney a few months ago, and we had to use the rooms again, from time to time because our son would get wore out after about an hour. And you can go to any first aid station and there's a whole bunch of quiet rooms, and they just put you in the room and, check on you and let us, if, or ask us if we need anything else. And we just would dive into these rooms for about 45 minutes and then go on. We couldn't stay there all day. There was just no way that our 19-year-old son was gonna, go past about 4 hours. There's just too much, but he wanted to enjoy it. And thank God they had these rooms just to provide a break,
Right.
and but they don't grow out of this. This isn't something you just move on with. And I think it's important that the work you guys are doing, because it's for adults, they don't want to admit that they have sensory issues, and then they're miserable at these concerts to begin with, so it's really important.
Scott, thanks for that. What a great thing to hear. And I didn't know it was that long ago in 2012. We actually we do have a gentleman up there, Skip, who's very active and made it more official, I think a year or two ago at Fenway Park. So they're doing more. They got the training, and there was a few other things added. And we, again, great intention with sensory friendly, which is a term that gets used a lot. And y'all will probably see this pretty frequently. Our step is the inclusion part, which is, to let them be a part of what we get to experience, right? Let them be not a specific time to go shopping, to go to a movie, to maybe do something at a venue, at a museum, when it's not open to the public. Let them come enjoy it with everybody else. And that's been our charge and our mission that's the inclusion part, is how do they get to participate like we all do? Come to the restaurant with us, come to the museum, come to the theater, be a part of that whole experience. So that's the next step that that we've always taken. And Culture City's pretty new. We've only been around for 10 years. It was founded and launched in 2014. There were some things on the ground a couple years prior to that we were doing, but not officially. And the Culture City name and what we stand for and what we do and the mission took off 10 years ago. So yeah, you bring up a good point, Scott. It's a little bit of the future as well. When you talked about the service that you got in the sensory room, we hope that's going to happen everywhere with our venue partners. When we partner with them, it's not we lose the communication, but we can't really control like how many bags are going out, how they're using them, what's going on. We do stay in touch. We do repeat the training every year, but the goal in the future that we're hearing from our venue partners and some of the things that we're seeing is to actually have teams at each venue that are doing this. So it's not just, implementing and then going on to the next venue, that we have repeat use and boots on the ground for them to have that experience like you did. Because I don't know that everybody gets that, but they should, right? They should definitely get that experience. So that's some of the future and where we're going, is getting more of our venue partners to take that next step. That might be in a few years, but it's definitely going to happen. It's going to need to happen. And I think you brought up some really good points that speaks to what's happening in communities. And one of the reports from the CDC is 1 out of 5 individuals fall on a sensory needs spectrum, and it's invisible. 86% of these individuals we can't see with the naked eye or determine, and I hate to use the word disability, there's a disability. So, very similar thing that I experienced with Jack, my son, who's now Scott. I think your son's 19. My son is 19 as well. And we had the experience of the Georgia Tech game. It was before he got diagnosed with this rare chromosome abnormality called chromosome 18p deletion, which is when we're born and our chromosomes pair and split. Number 18 chromosome for Jack, he's missing part of that chromosome. There's genes. There's almost 700 genes in that chromosome. Part of those have been deleted. Part of those have combined with 21. And the theme is just, it's all part of development. So he's missing some of that gene that's needed for development. And we categorized him as being on the spectrum, so he would get the services in school and get the IEP and all those sort of things. So it's worked well. He's come a long way. And one of those great examples, thank you, Scott. He's a huge Braves fan. He's a huge Atlanta fan. God bless him. He was born in Boston. I have to keep reminding him. But he loves his Braves. And I think it was in September, I got online and I said, you know what? I'm going to roll the dice here and I'm going to buy tickets. let's hope that there's a game they're going to play, they're meaning the Atlanta Braves, that's going to take them to the World Series. So I got online. It was probably like late September as they were rolling out the playoff schedule. And I went, looked, and I picked game 6 and bought tickets for the NALDS. And I said to Jack, look, this could be the game they're going to the World Series. And it actually happened. And I said to myself, geez, be careful what you wish for. Here's a kid that had sensory struggles in public places. And I figured, let's roll the dice and see how it goes. And we went, and they've got some things in place. It's, a pre-order for the bags and a few other things. So their intention is very good at that stadium. They're doing very good things at that stadium. It's a little outdated. We're working on that with them. Hopefully they're going to partner with us. But the story is, we went to the game and we sat in left field. And you want to talk about rowdy and noises and craziness. And we got to see them celebrate the championship on the field and go to the World Series. And Jack hung in there. And the next day we went for a walk with our dog, and he started talking to me about his experience. And I stopped him and I said, Jack, I think this would be very helpful for the community. Would you be open to talking about that again if I film you? And he said, absolutely. So we sat on a bench and he spent 3 minutes talking about his experience. And the thing that really stuck out to me, and maybe you'll resonate with this, Scott, is he talked about rhythms. When you're in public, he said it was so overwhelming. For 3 innings, I was struggling. And I couldn't really tell. And this is my son, who I know very well. And this kind of speaks to the community, like, you don't know what they're dealing with. And he said, I started to regulate the sounds where I could get a pattern of these repeated sounds and get into a cadence with it, that it started to not become a disruption. My body was able to accept it, in other words, and I was able to stay within the experience of what was happening with the game. And by the 4th inning, he said I was having a great time. The old Jack, that wouldn't have lasted maybe an out. We would have been out, right? But there's some of that goes on too, which they just need to self-regulate. And I think we were very fortunate that day that Jack was able to do it, but that's not the success story. That's not what happens. A majority of the time is they aren't able to regulate. They aren't able to process the output coming input to them and processing that through the 8 senses on what we do without even thinking about it, right? That they've got to kind of go through this Rolodex and figure out, how can I stay within the environment? How can I make this a great experience for myself and the people around me? Because if I don't deal with it well, it's not going to be fun for the people around me. And I've got many of those stories. And it dated back when Jack was in elementary school. And I live in Kennesaw, Georgia, and worked in Atlanta, which might not mean much to you all, but geographically, that's about 28 miles one way. And I kept this close by because I knew at least once a month I was getting a phone call from the principal. And this was when Jack was in like 2nd and 3rd grade. I got to come pick him up at school. He's under his desk. He's having a meltdown, and the teacher's trying to run a session, and Jack is classified as a disruption. And I wouldn't disagree. If I was the teacher, I would feel the same way. I'm trying to give a lesson. I'm trying to engage with my students. And Jack has just derailed the whole time that we're trying to run a class. So he had to be taken out of class. I'd come get him. Now, the beauty of this is I had a principal who was patient and willing to do a lot of trial and error with Jack, but not all principals are like that. And this was many, many years ago. It's probably about 13 years ago. Yeah, 13 years ago. Which is another area that we're trying to get into is the school system, especially elementary and middle school, is how do we train the staff and, again, provide resources and tools? Because Jack didn't have that in elementary school. What he had was an empathetic vice principal. What he had was an understanding teacher and a faculty that wanted to work with Jack and figure it out. And we got there. But they're not all like that. Not all the environments are like that. Now, that was many years ago. I think things are starting to change. And the biggest indicator of that was when Jack went to middle school. And candidly, as a single dad, and I'm having this experience with him in elementary school, I'm thinking, you know what? I don't think this is going to work. I've got to start looking at private schools. So I was shopping that while we were getting ready for Jack's projection into middle school. And we rolled the dice. So we did it, and it became the best experience. It only became the best experience for Jack because of the environment, because the faculty was trained, because the faculty understood individuals like Jack, and they had not only resources in place, but actual classrooms and faculty that led this charge. And my son went from a disruption in the classroom to the teacher's best friends. And I literally mean that. They were his best friends. And he made honor roll, which speaks volumes to the village, why it's important to have a village around these individuals, why it's important to have these resources and tools, while training is important. We got super lucky. There was a lady here in Georgia by the name of Emily Rubin, who worked with the Marcus Autism Center many years ago. She's off the charts intelligent, but really an expert in neurodiversion and autism specifically. She reached out to Bernie Marcus, who owns the Marcus Autism Center. If you're familiar with Atlanta, you're familiar with the Marcus Autism Center. They're world renowned now. They have all the data. They are the lead in statistical information about these individuals. And what was different then versus later was Emily said to Bernie, your research and what you're doing is phenomenal, but it's a white ivory tower. You're doing nothing to impact communities. And that's why I'm interested in coming to work for you. And it took a little while, but Bernie finally said, you know what, Emily, you're right. What do you want to do? She said, I want to go to the school system because that's where it's needed most. And I bring this story up because she did some incredible work. And what she did for us and the school system Jack went to, which was Autry Middle School, I learned later that was the first school that she trained in the state of Georgia. So it was like seamless. She would go in and train the staff for a year. She would paperwork and stay in touch with them year two. And she went on and worked each county in the state of Georgia. She's moved on and is doing other things now. But that lady has changed not only our lives, but many other lives that have gone through that school system and still do. And like I said, my son became best friends with the teachers. Still to this day, we talk with those teachers. Mr. James is a 8th grade science teacher that worked with Jack, and now Jack's 19 and in his second semester at Kennesaw State University. That would have never happened without Emily Rubin and her efforts in a community that accepted her and took her training and put it into use to change lives. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
I think Lindsay had either a question or a comment.
Thank you, Scott.
You're referring to me, right, Scott?
I sure am.
Okay. I think most of it, Dan, you touched on. I like you and Scott and a lot of people here, I think this is more of a common experience than we realize it to be. My son is also 19. He's a freshman in college. When he was 3 years old, he was given an SPD diagnosis that initially was thought out to be Asperger's, and it turned out to be ADHD. Nonetheless, severe, auditory defensiveness, light sensitivity, being the disruption in the classroom. So I can relate to a lot of your personal experience with this, and also as a single mom dealing with it, I empathize with you and with Chris and with Scott. Like, it's not only the seeing them, act out in the world, trying to understand it for themselves, but it's also you and your own ignorance as you try to navigate that with them, and coming together full circle in that experience and being able to empathize and help others understand how to empathize with your child is probably one of the most excruciating experiences, but also the most rewarding. My son is very athletic for that regard, and I took the sports route to help him address his his interest, his curiosity. So he ended up being a very regarded pitcher, and he played all the way up to high school. And it was his SPD that gave him the talent to focus and to find his where he could shine and where his talent could be accepted and appreciated. I was going to ask you about the efforts of Culture City when it comes to schools, but you touched on that a little bit. And I was also going to ask you from an inclusion perspective, if Culture City has any specific focus on underrepresented communities. As an immigrant, as somebody who, is a person of color and English is my second language, for me, it was really, really hard at the beginning of this journey to have access to information. And so from there, I even have to hire legal counsel to fight a school situation I went through. I mean, it was a whole thing, but I had to learn it. I had to build the plane as I flew it. And I know it's not an abnormal experience that the access to information does not come in the same bucket for everybody. And so I was wondering if you guys, from an inclusivity standpoint, also dissect the communities by, socioeconomic status and things like that.
That's a great question. I'm not aware that we do it that way. I think we just see it as whole, and we see it as how do we infuse communities with acceptance and inclusion, and what are we doing to be kind of on the ground level with that, with our resources and tools. Some of the other things we're doing, I may have mentioned it, is we're training first responders. I don't know if I've mentioned that here on the call, but the service, the training that we've done at venues has now made its way into municipalities and working with mayors and chiefs of police and fire marshals. If we recall stories of, they've got a hard enough job as it is to be a police officer these days. And you roll up on a scene, we're just trying to create another, file, if I will, in an old school mentality here, of a Rolodex, as you're processing as a first responder, getting to a scene and having to react quickly and do it right is hard. We're going to make mistakes. We're just trying to add another level of efficiency, another level of training that they can identify that, no, this person struggling in the middle of the road, staggering, is not drunk or on drugs. This person actually is neurodivergent, and we've got a process that we're going to take now knowing this. And that's what we're doing. We've trained probably about 14,000 first responders to date. I don't know if this is really answering your question, Lindsay, but
it's interesting though. Go ahead.
And then I'll wrap up with a thought. We haven't trained one yet here in Georgia, and that's one of the things I'm working on. So we're starting to have some of those conversations. It's super needed. As I said earlier, our services become more of a reality and relevant when bad things happen in communities. We're just trying to get those minimized as much as we can. So we've got venues, we got first responders, school systems has been a struggle. We hope to get in there. It's very hard to break in. The other one is, and our big vision is, how do we work with companies? At the end of the day, there's great organizations out there that are doing awesome things for this community, where they're getting them prepped and ready for interviewing, right? They're helping them understand how to do all these things, find a job, get interviewed, go with them on the interviews. They get the job, and then they're left to the environment. If that isn't sustainable, they're not going to succeed. So that's our next big effort, is how do we partner with big corporations, businesses in general, and make this impact? Because the path to independence, as we all know, is a job. You don't have a job, you're not going to be independent. These individuals are going to be left to others to decide for them. And unfortunately, their parents will outgrow them, and they're left to the system. So we want to get ahead of that. That's kind of a next movement for us. And then lastly, Lindsay, to your question, if you have anything specific that you need some resources or help on or counsel, please email me or DM me. I'll look within our system and see if we have anything for you. If not, we'll be able to recommend some things for you. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. I'm good now, thank God. But
Right, look, I can understand the audience.
in general, I was just wondering because I know there are different layers to the issue you're trying to tackle, and like I said, I know the access to resources, to information, to legal support, to medical support. I mean, my son went through occupational therapy since age 3 through age 12. That was out of pocket. Like, there's not a lot of insurance and cost, support for that. So I didn't know the extent of what Culture City was trying to scope.
Yeah,
Something to consider, like it might be good to also navigate other layers on that.
thank you for that. And you've navigated it already, as you said. I can imagine the IEP process that you went through, if they have those in the communities. I mean, a whole nother nightmare is dealing with the faculty and getting them on board with what really needs to happen and what services need to be available within the school system. Can be a challenge. So real quick, I'm going to throw it out to anybody here.
Lindsay Dowd has a question.
Okay. Hey, Lindsay.
Hey, Dan. What is the most helpful thing that we can do as a community to support Culture City?
Thank you. Well, I think there's a few things. One would be, if you don't already have it on your phone, you can download our app. It's Culture City, spelled with a K. On the app, you'll see some venue partners that we have. So within your own community, you can make those recommendations to folks that might be traveling or live or reside near you, that you can see where our partners are. We need to update it, but it does have a good amount of our partners in there, Lindsay. The other thing is just keep doing what you're doing, have awareness of your surroundings and things going on around you with this community, what you can do to help. And that might be as little as you're at a restaurant and you notice that it might be overwhelming for some of those individuals to even go to that restaurant. Talk with the staff. If you have venues near you, wherever you live in your community, that you think they could use our services, we know they could use our services. We're talking about 20% of a customer base, that they could get an invitation to by working through us and making that venue or that restaurant or that theater or that museum or that aquarium a certified sensory inclusive venue, would now set them up for this community to come to their venue. And we do the training, we provide the tools, we'd look at sensory rooms, all those things. It's super efficient. We're not talking about breaking a budget here. It's a few $1,000s or three-year agreements. We're not a one and done. And we fundraise so it doesn't cost the venue and our partners a lot of money to do this training. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. I think just being advocates for who we are, what we do in your own little neighborhood is a beautiful thing.
I meant, like, what kinds of things can we as a community talk about? What are the things that needs more of a spotlight? Certainly supporting anyone in the community, that's a no-brainer. But I mean, like, we have an opportunity to amplify Culture City. I didn't really know what it was. So,
yeah,
how we communicate, to support you, just help us with that, because that, I think we all have a platform, and this community is incredible. So
thank you.
The more prescriptive you can be with, like, these are 3 things that can help, and even like post it in the app. I think a lot of us like to do that.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah. And I think the number one answer would be, how do we get in with more school systems, within the own neighborhood or community or town that you live in, and or the first responders, local police station, ambulance, fire station, any of those is going to make a huge impact. If a community's 20% and they're called out, there was a crazy statistics. I don't want to butcher it, but the 911 phone call right now and the operator for 911 is on overload. And there was a major statistic about this the other day that I heard. Not going to try to repeat it, I'll butcher it, but they're trying to reduce those phone calls coming in. And the way to reduce it is really about education and training on the neighborhoods we all live in. And it starts with mayors, chiefs of police, fire marshals, getting familiar with Culture City, reaching out to us, learning about our training, talking with principals within the school, talking with the mayors about how do we get in the school system to help these elementary and middle school kids succeed and be a part of the classroom environment.
We're also, Lindsay, we're working on having Dominique Wilkins, who's, you know, one of the all-time great basketball players, like, you know, kind of like almost like on the Mount Rushmore of basketball, who's the chairman of Culture City, to come on and talk to the community. Not necessarily about Culture City, but I'm sure that would be a little bit of a discussion point. But, you know, when you think about 700 members, just do this math. Let's say that every member has 1,000 social media followers, which we know that that number is probably way, way off, because there are a lot of people in this community that have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. That's seven. If everyone just has 1,000 total social media followers across all platforms, that's 700,000 people that we can potentially impact. And that number is probably much more in the millions. So by bringing on, you know, by Dan doing a power hour and being kind enough to help with, you know, somebody like Dominique Wilkins coming on, you know, that's where I think we can make a difference.
Well, the kindness is with all of you, and to have this opportunity and this platform to talk about what we do is really the blessing for me, and the blessing for our organization, the blessing for these individuals and what they really need, because they need us to be the voice. They're not able to do it themselves. In some cases they are, most cases they're not, but they all have a gift. We all have a gift.
I think what's interesting too is, you know, it's surprising when you hear, you know, all of the different people on this call that have had kids that are affected. And, you know, I remember going into IEPs, and I would literally, so there's a very prominent attorney here in Connecticut. His name is Howard Clevenaugh. And I knew my kids, my son needed a neuropsych eval, which is crazy expensive. And the best guy around was this guy, Dr. Fulco. And they were like shutting it down, wouldn't do it. And as soon as I said Howard Clevenaugh, they were like, oh, okay, you know, like maybe we're gonna take care of this. But those, I think, just understanding that, whether it's me, Lindsay, Scott, whatever, like there's a lot of people. I think we just have to be open books, because there's a lot of people in our community that are affected by things that we all have lots of experience with. But sometimes we, you know, we keep that stuff close. And we're not potentially helping as many people in the community by doing that.
Just, it's such a great comment, Scott, and a little bit of my ignorance. I'll be candid with this group. You know, I started this conversation by feeling like I needed to provide a little education. I don't think I did. So thank you for stopping me, Scott. And you know, it's nice to just kind of free form and talk about who we are, what we do, and get some input and questions from you guys is really invaluable. I was going to ask if anybody wants to do this right now, pull up Google. You can all do it if you want. Just pull up Google right now and type in babies born, and we're just talking about one group, babies born to autism in 2023, and tell me what you see.
One in 36.
1 out of 36. I think that stat was 1 out of 53 a year or two ago.
Yeah, it's dropping.
Look, you know, I'm not going to push higher power on you, but something's going on. We're getting prepared for something. And if we don't start in our own little communities, this isn't directed at anybody on this call, This is just in general. If we don't start paying attention to that and creating a infrastructure for this community, it's going to cost a lot of money and a lot of aggravation. And we feel like we can't run fast enough or be enough for what's needed out there. But, that's just one group. So, wow, it's already 1:00.
Yeah, let's end with Scott Heathman. And then, the good thing about these power hours is you can do them as often as you want. So these don't have to be one and done. And I think this is, such a big thing to tackle. And there's so many personal stories that people want to share that it's hard to cram it all into an hour. So, we're open for as many of these power hours as possible. Scott, and then Kathy and I actually have to jump. Kathy, does Victoria know we're running late?
Sorry, guys. Thank you. Scott, hit me up.
Yeah,
Anybody else if you need anything else? Apologize for running a little over. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah, I'm going to hit you up privately. I don't
All
want
right,
to.
y'all have an awesome day. Scott, Kathy, thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys.